Nobody orders from Gerardo Romani's table. Nobody looks at him directly. Nobody speaks unless spoken to first. The king of the concrete, the man whose designer suits cost more than most people's cars and whose coal-black eyes had signed death warrants with nothing more than a blink, sat at his usual corner booth in crimson and steel with a crystal tumbler of vintage Remy Martin cognac balanced in his ringed fingers. He'd just knocked the glass off the table, deliberately, at the feet of a waitress who'd been working there for exactly 3 nights. Every person in that velvet-draped establishment knew what came next. The girl would apologize. The girl would scramble. The girl would quit before her shift ended if she had any sense of self-preservation left in her bones. But Molly Warner didn't move. She didn't gasp as amber liquid pooled across Italian marble. She didn't flinch as the most feared man in New York watched her with the cold patience of a predator testing prey. Instead, she bent down, cleaned the spill with surgical precision, then stood, eye level with the devil himself, and placed a folded napkin on his table. "Your clumsiness is showing, Mr. Romani." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Gerardo's lieutenants, men who'd broken bones for looking at their boss wrong, froze mid-breath. But Molly's gaze never wavered, her hazel eyes holding a stillness so absolute it felt like violence. For the first time in 15 years, Gerardo Romani felt something crack beneath his ribs. Something that felt dangerously close to respect. Gerardo had destroyed men's entire bloodlines for less than a sideways glance. He'd burned businesses to ash over a perceived insult. But this woman, this nobody in a polyester uniform with hands that had clearly scrubbed too many floors, she didn't just challenge him. She looked straight through the monster everyone else saw and found something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. What started as a test of dominance became the dismantling of an empire and the resurrection of 2 people who'd forgotten they were still capable of trust. This is that story. A waitress who just called the most feared man in New York clumsy to his face. A crime lord who felt something crack inside his chest. If you're listening right now, you need to understand something. This isn't just another Mafia romance. This is about 2 people so broken they forgot they were still capable of trust, finding each other in the most dangerous place imaginable. My analytics show that 79% of you aren't subscribed yet. But if you want to witness how a girl who learned to become invisible ends up standing beside the king of the concrete, hit that subscribe button right now. Because Molly Warner has been surviving her whole life, but she's never been truly seen. Until now. Let me show you where it all began. But to understand why Molly stood there, why her hands didn't shake, why she stared into the eyes of the man every waitress in the city avoided, we have to go back 3 weeks earlier. Back to the cramped studio apartment in Queens where Molly Warner woke at 4:30 every morning to the sound of sirens and shouting through paper-thin walls. The room was barely 10 feet across. A Murphy bed that wouldn't fold properly anymore. A hot plate older than she was. A bathroom the size of a closet where the shower only ran cold and the mirror had a crack shaped like lightning. The radiator clanked but never produced heat, so winter seeped through the warped window frame like a living thing, freezing her awake most nights. Molly worked 2 jobs every day, without exception. In the morning, she bussed tables at a 24-hour diner where truckers left dollar bills and the smell of grease never washed out of her hair. In the evening, she started her shift at Crimson and Steel, where men in $1,000 suits left $100 tips and never looked her in the face. She slept 5 hours on good nights, survived on day-old bagels the diner gave her, and hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. Her hands were scarred, thin white lines across her knuckles from years of scalding dishwater, and a burn mark on her left forearm shaped like a crescent moon. The permanent reminder of the night her world ended. 17 years earlier, Molly had been an 8-year-old girl pulled from her bedroom by a neighbor while her childhood home burned. Her mother made it out. Her father didn't. The police called it a targeted arson related to outstanding gambling debts. Her mother called it the end of their family. What followed were 9 years of running, 6 different schools, 4 different cities, 3 different last names. Molly learned to pack a bag in under 10 minutes. She learned to sleep with one eye open. She learned that people who smiled the widest usually wanted something you couldn't afford to give. By the time she was 17, her mother had drunk herself into an early grave, and Molly was alone. She learned not to ask for help. She learned to read a room in 3 seconds flat who was dangerous, who was desperate, who was worth the risk of eye contact. She learned to become background noise, a ghost in a uniform, the girl nobody remembered an hour after she left. It was the only skill that kept her alive. Until the night she made the fatal mistake of looking Gerardo Romani directly in the eyes. The alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., and Molly's hand found it in the dark before her eyes opened. Muscle memory. Survival instinct. The kind of reflex you develop when sleeping through an alarm means not eating that day. The shower ran cold. It always ran cold. The landlord had promised to fix it 3 months ago, the same day he'd promised the heat would work this winter. Both were lies. Molly stood under the icy stream for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to wash away yesterday's grease and cigarette smoke, short enough that hypothermia didn't set in. The mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting her reflection into 2 separate people. She'd stopped looking at it months ago. The diner shift started at 5. 6 hours of refilling coffee for truckers who called her sweetheart and left dollar bills that smelled like diesel. 6 hours of smiling when hands lingered too long on hers during transactions. 6 hours of pretending she didn't notice the cook saving her the burnt toast and day-old donuts because he knew she wouldn't eat otherwise. At 11:30 a.m., she counted her tips in the bathroom stall. $23. Rent was due in 3 days. She was $400 short. The evening shift at Crimson and Steel started at 6. Different uniform. Different men. Same invisibility. Here, the suits cost more than her annual income, and the tips could feed her for a week. She served whiskey that cost $300 a glass to men who didn't look at her face. She was part of the furniture. A ghost in a polyester uniform. Exactly how she needed to be. By midnight, her feet screamed and her hands, scarred from years of scalding dishwater and the crescent moon burn on her forearm that never quite faded, ached down to the bone. She pocketed leftover bread from the kitchen. The night manager pretended not to see. The collection notice was still taped to her door when she got home at 1 a.m. Final notice. Outstanding debt for Warner, James. Estate of 17 years he'd been dead. 17 years she'd been paying for his mistakes. The debt collectors didn't care that she'd been 8 when her father burned. They didn't care that she'd watched him beg men in black cars for more time. They just wanted their money. Molly peeled the notice off, added it to the stack of identical ones in her drawer, and set her alarm for 4:30 a.m. Tomorrow would be exactly the same. Until it wasn't. Gerardo Romani returned the next night. And the night after that. And the night after that. Same booth. Same time. 9 p.m. exactly, when Crimson and Steel filled with the kind of people who made their money in ways the IRS would never see. He'd arrive with his lieutenants, men with dead eyes and expensive watches, and the entire restaurant would shift. Conversations dropped to whispers. Waitresses suddenly remembered they had tables on the opposite side of the room. Molly's section. He ordered the Chateau Margaux. Wanted her to describe the terroir, the vintage, the tasting notes. She did, standing at his table while he swirled the wine, watching her over the rim of the glass like she was something he was deciding whether to crush or keep. His lieutenants stared at her the way wolves watch wounded deer. "Where are you from?" he asked on night 3, his voice carrying that particular kind of quiet that demanded answers. "Queens." "Why are your hands scarred?" "Dishwater." "Burns." "Life." "Are you always this mouthy, or am I special?" She met his coal-black eyes without flinching. "You're not special, Mr. Romani. You're just persistent." One of the lieutenants reached for his jacket. Gerardo raised a hand. The movement stopped. The other waitresses wouldn't look at her anymore. In the break room, they'd go silent when she entered. Maria, who'd worked there for 6 years, crossed herself when Molly walked past. The bartender started making her drink stronger, like he was preparing her for a funeral. But every night, Molly stood at Gerardo's table and answered his questions with surgical precision. She never apologized, never softened her words, never looked away first. When he asked why she wasn't afraid, she told him fear was a luxury for people who had something left to lose. He smiled at that. Not kindly, like he'd found something rare. By week 2, she understood what was happening. This wasn't about service. This wasn't about testing her competence. Gerardo Romani was hunting something he couldn't name, some quality in her stillness, some defiance in her eyes that looked like the opposite of everything his empire was built on. Every night, she walked out of Crimson and Steel alive. Every night, she made it to the employee parking lot before her hands started shaking. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds to let the fear leak out. Then she locked it back down, got on the subway, and went home. Tomorrow, he'd be there again. And so would she. It was 11 p.m. when Molly heard the begging. She was cleaning the Venetian room, one of Crimson and Steel's private dining spaces where deals happened that would never see daylight. The door was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. Just cracked open enough that sound leaked through like blood through gauze. Please, Mr. Romani, I can explain. You stole from me. Gerardo's voice was cold. Absolute. The kind of tone that preceded obituaries. You know what happens now. Molly should have left. Should have grabbed her cleaning cart and disappeared into the kitchen like every survival instinct screamed at her to do. Instead, she moved closer. Risked a glance through the crack. A man on his knees. Middle-aged. Balding. Sobbing into his hands. A gun on the table between him and Gerardo, who sat with the stillness of a judge at an execution. One of the lieutenants stood by the door, hand inside his jacket. Then Gerardo leaned back. Lit a cigarette. The smoke curled toward the ceiling like a ghost. Your daughter starts college next month. Columbia, right? His voice hadn't warmed, but something in it had shifted. How's she going to pay tuition if you're dead? The man's sobbing intensified. Gerardo slid an envelope across the table. You're going to work off what you owe. 15 years. Every month, you make a payment. You miss one, just one, I don't come for you. He paused, let the silence build. I come for her. The man grabbed the envelope like it was salvation itself. Kissed Gerardo's ring with shaking lips. Whispered gratitude that sounded like prayer. Get out. Molly stepped back, but her shoe caught the edge of the cleaning cart. The bottle of glass cleaner tipped. Fell. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. The lieutenant appeared in the doorway first. Then Gerardo. His coal-black eyes found hers in the dim corridor. No surprise. No anger. Just recognition. They both knew she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, the monster making a choice that wasn't monstrous. The king of the concrete offering mercy when everyone expected blood. He didn't move toward her. Didn't threaten. Just stood there, cigarette burning between his fingers, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You work late, he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. She'd crossed some invisible threshold. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness. And witnesses in Gerardo Romani's world had 2 options, become complicit or become corpses. Molly met his gaze. I do. He nodded once. Turned back into the room. The door closed with a soft click. She stood in that hallway for a full minute before her legs remembered how to move. They were waiting for her at 2 a.m. in the alley behind her building. 2 men in coats that cost more than her rent. One leaned against the dumpster like he owned it. The other blocked the fire escape, her usual route when the front door stuck. They'd planned this. Knew her patterns. Knew she'd come this way. Molly Warner. The one by the dumpster smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Or should we call you Molly Castellano? That was your name before your mother started running, wasn't it? Her blood went cold. We know about your father, James Warner. The debts he couldn't pay. The fire that wasn't an accident. He pushed off the dumpster, moved closer. We know about your mother's grave in Pottersfield. Section 39. No headstone. Just a number. Things she'd never told anyone. Things buried so deep she'd convinced herself they'd stayed buried. We also know you've been spending a lot of time with Gerardo Romani. The second man's voice was gravel and cigarettes. Interesting choice for a girl trying to stay invisible. I'm just a waitress. No. The first man pulled something from his pocket. A vial. Clear liquid. You're an opportunity. He held it up to the dim streetlight. The liquid caught the glow like mercury. Poison his next drink. Walk away with $50,000 and a clean slate. We erase your father's debts. All of them. Every collection agency, every paper trail, every mistake he made that you've been paying for. He stepped closer. We'll erase you too. New name. New city. New life. You can disappear. Start over. Be anyone you want. The vial hung between them like a verdict. All you have to do is kill the man who's been watching you like you're a puzzle he's trying to solve. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, begging for more time. The smell of gasoline. The way the flames had eaten everything she'd ever known. 3 days. He pressed the vial into her palm. It was warm. Or maybe her hands were just cold. That's all you get to decide. They started walking away. Then the second one turned back. He's not what you think he is, girl. Men like Romani don't have mercy. Whatever you saw, that thing with the father and the daughter, it was theater. He'll use you and throw you away like everyone else. Don't be stupid enough to think you're different. Their footsteps faded into the night. Molly stood in that alley until dawn broke over the buildings, the vial burning a hole in her pocket like a lit match. She was standing at a crossroads where every direction ended in blood. The only question was whose. Molly didn't show up for her diner shift. She went straight to Crimson and Steel at noon, when the velvet-draped dining room was empty and the chandeliers hung dark. The day manager tried to stop her at the door. She walked past him. Security reached for her arm. She shrugged it off. Kept walking. Through the empty dining room. Past the bar where bottles gleamed like jewels. Down the hallway reserved for people who actually mattered. To the door at the end with no nameplate because everyone already knew whose office it was. She didn't knock. Gerardo sat behind a desk of mahogany and leather, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan like a kingdom he'd conquered. He looked up. No surprise in those coal-black eyes. Just that same predatory stillness he always wore like armor. Molly walked to the desk. Placed the vial on the polished surface between them. The Morettas sent this. They want you dead. They think I'm desperate enough to do it. The vial sat there like an accusation. Clear liquid catching the noon light. Gerardo didn't move. Didn't reach for it. Didn't call for the guards she could hear breathing on the other side of the door. He just stared at her with eyes that had watched empires fall and men beg for mercy they'd never receive. Why didn't you? His voice was granite. A question that demanded truth. Molly met his gaze. Held it. Because I don't kill people for money. I'm not my father. Something shifted in the air between them. A fundamental recalibration of power. Gerardo stood. Walked around the desk with the measured grace of an apex predator. Stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke, and something darker underneath. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You just made yourself a target. You know that. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. The Morettas would come for her now. Not because she'd failed. Because she'd chosen a side. Molly nodded. I know. He smiled. It wasn't kind. It was something far worse, respect. The kind of recognition one soldier gives another in a war zone. Then I guess I'll have to keep you alive. That was the moment everything changed. Molly Warner stopped being invisible. Stopped being the ghost in the uniform who cleaned up messes and disappeared into background noise. She became real. Solid. Someone worth protecting. And Gerardo Romani became something more dangerous than her enemy. He became her ally. The king of the concrete had just declared war on anyone who touched her. And in his world, declarations like that were written in blood. The penthouse wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, like Gerardo owned every light that burned below. Security cameras in every corner, their red eyes blinking in the darkness. Guards outside every door, silent men with earpieces who nodded when she passed, but never quite looked away. Gerardo didn't ask if she wanted to stay here. He told her, "You're a liability now. The Morettas know you chose me. They'll come for you." He'd said it in the car, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. This is the only place they can't reach. Molly should have felt trapped. Should have hated the gilded cage, the surveillance, the constant presence of men with guns. But that first night, she slept through until morning. No sirens bleeding through paper-thin walls. No shouting from the apartment next door. No fear of eviction notices or debt collectors or the smell of gasoline that still haunted her dreams. Just silence. And Gerardo, in the next room, working until 3 a.m. on things she wasn't supposed to know about. They existed in a strange limbo, not quite enemies, not quite friends, circling each other like wounded animals learning to trust. He'd come home late, jacket over his shoulder, blood sometimes on his cuffs that he never explained. She'd be reading in the living room, barefoot on furniture that cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. He started asking her questions. Real ones. About her life before Crimson and Steel. About the scars on her hands. About her father and the fire and the 17 years she'd spent paying for his mistakes. She answered because lying to Gerardo Romani felt more dangerous than the truth. And because something in his eyes said he already knew most of it anyway, he just wanted to hear her say it. Late one night, when sleep wouldn't come, she found him on the balcony, whiskey in hand, staring at the city spread out below like a kingdom he'd conquered but couldn't quite claim. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Building this?" He didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge her presence for a long moment. Just stood there, silhouetted against the skyline, smoke from his cigarette curling into the night air. Every day. 3 words. Spoken so softly she almost missed them. It was the first honest thing he'd ever said to her. Not the king of the concrete. Not the monster everyone feared. Just a man standing in the ruins of choices he couldn't undo. And somehow, that truth was more terrifying than everything else. Because it meant he was human. And humans could be broken. He just said he regrets it. Every day. The king of the concrete, the man who signed death warrants with a blink, just admitted he's human. And that terrifies Molly more than any threat ever could. If your heart is racing right now, you understand what's about to happen. Because 2 broken people are about to face something that will test everything they've just discovered about each other. Make sure you're subscribed because the next scene will change everything, and I mean everything. Someone inside Gerardo's own family is about to make their move. And Molly's survival instincts are about to become the only thing keeping them both alive. The Romani estate was old money trying to look older. Marble columns. Crystal chandeliers. Portraits of dead patriarchs, watching from gilded frames like judges at a trial that never ended. Molly was there as Gerardo's guest, a polite word for the woman everyone knew he was protecting. The judgment was palpable. Whispers followed her through rooms that smelled of expensive perfume and older grudges. Women in designer gowns looked through her like she was glass. Men in tailored suits stared too long, calculating what her presence meant for the family hierarchy. Gerardo kept her at his side, his hand on the small of her back, warm and possessive. A silent declaration of ownership that made her skin burn and everyone else look away. Then the lights went out. Gunfire erupted like thunder in an enclosed space. Screaming. The crash of shattering crystal. Chaos blooming in the darkness like blood in water. Someone had planned this. Someone inside the family. Someone who knew exactly when the security would be distracted by champagne and tradition. Molly's instincts kicked in, the same survival reflexes that had kept her alive in foster homes where danger wore a smile, in apartments where knowing the fire escape routes meant the difference between breathing and burning. She grabbed Gerardo's arm. The kitchen. Staff entrance. Now. No hesitation. No questions. They ran. Through corridors she shouldn't know. Past bodies slumped against walls, past overturned furniture, and the metallic smell of fresh violence. She led him through the servants' passages, the invisible architecture of every mansion, the routes people like her memorized without thinking because survival meant always knowing where the exits were. Behind them, footsteps. Shouting. The distinct sound of slides being racked. They burst through the kitchen door. Past industrial ovens and prep stations. Molly shouldered open the service entrance, the door delivery trucks used, the one no guest ever saw, and pulled Gerardo into the alley beyond. He was bleeding. Shoulder wound, dark stains spreading across his white shirt. They crouched in the darkness between dumpsters, breathing hard, as gunfire still echoed from inside the estate. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Gerardo looked at her. Really looked. Like he was seeing her for the first time. How did you know? Molly pulled off her jacket, pressed it against his shoulder to slow the bleeding. Wiped blood from his face with her sleeve, her hands steady despite everything. People like us? She met his eyes in the darkness. We always know where the exits are. Understanding passed between them. Not gratitude. Something deeper. Recognition. They were both survivors. Both ghosts who'd learned to navigate the spaces between worlds. Gerardo wanted revenge. Wanted blood. Wanted to burn down every branch of the family tree until he found the rot. Molly stopped him. You're not thinking clearly. She stood between him and the door of the penthouse, unmovable. Whoever did this, they wanted chaos. They wanted you emotional. They wanted you to strike back blindly so you'd expose yourself. His jaw clenched. The bandage on his shoulder was still fresh, white gauze against olive skin. They killed 6 people. And they'll kill more if you give them what they want. Silence. Heavy as a gravestone. She was right. He knew she was right. The rage burning in his chest wouldn't bring anyone back. It would only dig more graves. So Molly did what she did best. She became invisible again. She went back to crimson and steel. Back to the uniform that made her part of the furniture. Back to serving drinks and clearing plates, while men in expensive suits talked like she wasn't there. But now she was listening. Watching. Reading the room the way she'd been trained to since she was 8 years old, and survival meant noticing what adults thought children missed. She saw it on the 3rd night. Gerardo's cousin. Marco. The one who'd smiled too widely at the victim's funeral. The one whose eyes had lingered too long on the empty seat at the head of the family table, like he was already measuring himself for the throne. She followed the threads. Eavesdropped on conversations in the smoking room. Memorized names and meeting times. Used her invisibility like a weapon, the girl nobody noticed, collecting secrets like loose change. 2 weeks later, she walked into Gerardo's office and placed a folder on his desk. Bank statements showing offshore accounts. Meeting records with Moretti Associates. Security footage of Marco leaving the estate 20 minutes before the lights went out, his face caught in the parking lot cameras he'd forgotten existed. Everything Gerardo needed to bury the traitor without starting a war. He stared at the evidence. Then at her. Those coal-black eyes unreadable. You could have run. Taken the chaos and disappeared. Molly shrugged. I'm tired of running. That night, Marco disappeared. No trial. No spectacle. No body that would ever be found. Just gone, like he'd never existed at all. The family got the message. Gerardo got his revenge. And the war everyone expected never came. Molly stood at the penthouse window, watching the city lights blur into constellations, and understood exactly what kind of man she'd chosen to stand beside. Not a good man. Not even close. But hers. 6 months later, Gerardo still owned half the city. But he didn't rule it the same way. The terror was quieter now, more surgical. The respect he commanded was earned through calculated mercy and strategic violence, not the indiscriminate brutality that had built his reputation. Men still feared him, but now they also listened. And Molly? She wasn't a waitress anymore. She sat at his table at Crimson and Steel, not behind it. The corner booth that had once been enemy territory was now hers. The staff called her Ms. Warner with genuine deference. The lieutenants, men who'd watched her clean up spilled cognac with defiant hands, now nodded when she entered a room, their expressions carefully neutral, but their eyes holding something close to respect. She'd become the woman who tamed the king of the concrete. Not through seduction or manipulation, but through something far more dangerous. She'd reminded him he was human. That beneath the tailored suits and the body count, there was still a man capable of mercy. Capable of choice. They weren't lovers. Not yet. Maybe never. But they were something else. Something without a name. Something forged in fire and blood and choices that couldn't be undone. Partners in a war only they understood. Gerardo looked at her across the table, a rare smile playing at his lips. The kind of expression most people never live to see. You know they call you the queen of the underworld now. Molly sipped her wine, a vintage she could actually pronounce now, though she still preferred cheap beer. Let them talk. We both know I'm just a girl who refused to run. He reached across the table, took her scarred hand in his, the burn mark, the calluses, the white lines from years of survival. His thumb traced the crescent moon scar on her forearm, the permanent reminder of the night her father died. No. His voice was quiet. Certain. You're the girl who stood her ground when everyone else fell. That's something different entirely. The weight of his words settled between them like a vow. For the first time since her father died in flames, since she'd learned that love was a liability and trust was a death sentence, Molly Warner allowed herself to believe something dangerous. That maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where she didn't have to survive alone. Where the scars on her hands weren't marks of shame, but proof she'd lived. Where standing her ground had earned her something more valuable than money or safety. A home in the wreckage. And someone who understood what it cost to build it. What an absolutely powerful journey we've just experienced together. Molly went from surviving alone in a freezing apartment to finding a home in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. If you were moved by this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of survival, redemption, and the kind of love that's forged in fire. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And I have to know what hit you hardest. The moment she refused to run? When Gerardo admitted his regrets? Or that final scene where she finally found home? Comment below and let's discuss. Your engagement means everything to this channel. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.